The winter wind howled through the streets of Fargo, North Dakota, carrying whispers that cut deeper than the cold. Rebecca Nichols stood on the weathered porch of the town hall, her fingers clutching a crumpled letter as 23 pairs of eyes glared at her with a coldness that matched the December air of 1876. Inside, the town council had just cast their final vote, unanimously deciding her fate as if she were nothing more than an unwanted stray. "The decision is final," Mayor Hollister announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd gathered in the snowy street. "Rebecca Nichols is to leave Fargo within 3 days. Anyone harboring or assisting her will face similar consequences." Rebecca's throat tightened, but she refused to let them see her cry. The daughter of a respected doctor, she had once been welcomed in every home in Fargo. Now, accused of witchcraft after 3 children fell ill under her care as the town's midwife, she had become their scapegoat, something to fear, something to cast out. From the edge of the crowd, Wade Hamilton watched, his jaw clenched tight beneath his stubbled face. He'd returned from a cattle drive just yesterday to find the town in an uproar. Wade had known Rebecca since they were children playing along the river banks. She was many things: stubborn, outspoken, perhaps too educated for some folks' liking, but she was no witch. As the crowd began to disperse, their judgment delivered, Wade pushed through to reach her. Rebecca's honey-brown hair whipped around her face, partly escaping from its practical bun. Her green eyes, usually bright with life, now held a wounded defiance. "Rebecca," Wade called, his voice low as he approached the steps. She looked up, recognition softening her features momentarily before hardening again. "Wade Hamilton, come to cast your stone too? You know better than that." He climbed the steps, ignoring the disapproving glares from the departing townsfolk. "What happened?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Progress happened. The railroad brought a fancy new doctor from Chicago who says my herbal remedies are primitive superstition. When the Miller children caught scarlet fever, I couldn't save little Emma." Her voice cracked slightly. "The rest was easy. A woman who lives alone, reads too many books, and talks to plants must be in league with the devil." Wade shook his head, his weathered hat casting shadows across his face. At 32, he had seen enough of the world to know how fear worked, how quickly people abandoned reason when they needed someone to blame. "This is madness. You're the best healer this town has." "Was," she corrected, looking back at the town hall doors where Mayor Hollister and the council members were now emerging. "I have 3 days to pack my life and leave. Where does one go when cast out in December, Wade?" "The nearest town is 2 days' ride, and they'll have heard the rumors before I even arrive." Wade's blue eyes narrowed as he watched the self-satisfied faces of the council. These were men he'd shared drinks with, men whose cattle he'd helped drive to market. Now they stood tall with righteousness while condemning an innocent woman to what could very well be death in the winter wilderness. "You won't be going alone," he said finally, his voice carrying a certainty that made Rebecca look up sharply. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about not letting a bunch of frightened fools decide who's worthy and who isn't." Wade stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My cabin is 10 miles outside town. Stay there tonight. Tomorrow I'll come with my wagon and help you pack your things." Rebecca stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or deception. "You'd risk being outcast yourself. For me, for you," he confirmed. "And for what's right." The following morning, Wade arrived at Rebecca's small home on the edge of town, his wagon ready. A few neighbors peered from behind curtains as he helped her load her belongings, her books, her mother's china. The wooden chest containing dried herbs and tinctures that had saved more lives than the town was willing to remember. By noon, the council members had gathered, watching with stern disapproval as Wade secured Rebecca's rocking chair to the wagon. "Hamilton," Mayor Hollister called, stepping forward with several men at his back. "You understand what you're doing." Wade straightened, his hand instinctively moving closer to the revolver at his hip. "I'm helping a friend pack her belongings, Mayor, nothing more." That friend has been cast out by town vote. Assisting her makes you complicit in her activities. Wade's laugh held no humor. Her activities. You mean delivering half the babies in this town, including your youngest, Mayor. Or maybe you mean nursing folks through the influenza last winter when your fancy new doctor was too busy attending to the railroad executives. Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Rebecca stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Wade's arm. "Don't make this worse," she whispered. The mayor's face reddened. "The council's decision is final. Miss Nichols must leave Fargo and not return. If you help her, Hamilton, you're choosing her over this community." Wade looked around at the faces he'd known for years. Some looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Others stared back with a righteous conviction that chilled him more than the December wind. "Then I'm making my choice clear," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to his horse tied behind the wagon and began untying its reins. "If Rebecca goes, I go too." A gasp went through the crowd. Wade Hamilton was no ordinary cowboy. As one of the most successful cattle drivers in the territory, he brought business and connections to Fargo. His seasonal drives employed local men and brought money into town coffers. "Don't be hasty," Councilman Peters stepped forward. "We can discuss this privately." "Nothing to discuss," Wade replied, leading his horse to the front of the wagon. "You've made your choice, I'm making mine." Rebecca stared at him, her eyes wide. "Wade, you can't. Your livelihood is here. Your ranch can be sold," he finished, helping her onto the wagon's seat before climbing up beside her. "Or it'll be waiting if these folks come to their senses." Mayor Hollister's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "If you leave with her now, Hamilton, don't bother coming back." Wade took the reins in his hands, looking down at the man who had once been a friend. "I reckon that's a risk I'm willing to take." He clicked his tongue and the horses began moving forward. "Make a path, folks. We'll be out of your righteous town by sundown." As the wagon rolled forward, the crowd parted slowly, reluctantly. Rebecca sat rigid beside Wade, her hands clutched tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the faces of those who had condemned her. Wade guided the horses through the main street, past the general store where she had traded herbs, past the church where she had sung every Sunday, past the schoolhouse where she had once taught reading to the children who now hid behind their mother's skirts as she passed. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said quietly as the last buildings of Fargo fell behind them. "You're throwing away everything for someone the town has already decided is guilty." Wade kept his eyes on the road ahead. "The town decided wrong. Where will we go?" "West," he answered simply. "My brother settled in Montana Territory a few years back, wrote me that they're needing good folks who know ranching and healing both." Rebecca turned to look at him, studying his profile against the gray winter sky. "Why would you do this, Wade?" "We haven't spoken more than passing words in years." His hands tightened on the reins. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for something you didn't do." He met her gaze briefly. "And because it's the right thing to do." As the wagon continued west, snow began to fall, gradually erasing their tracks and the road back to Fargo. Rebecca watched the white flakes gather on Wade's broad shoulders and felt something she hadn't expected: hope, small but persistent, like the first spring flower pushing through winter soil. The first night on the trail, Wade made camp under a stand of cottonwoods beside a frozen creek. He worked efficiently, setting up a small tent for Rebecca while building a fire that soon crackled with welcome heat. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and a tin of coffee trail rations, but better than nothing. Rebecca huddled near the fire, watching as he tended the horses. In the firelight, she could see the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he left Fargo 3 years ago to establish his cattle business. She remembered him younger, more carefree, before his father's death had forced him to become the man of the family overnight. "Your mother," she said suddenly. "She'll be devastated that you've left." Wade nodded, settling across from her with a tin cup of coffee. "I wrote her a letter before I came to help you, Ask young Jimmy Fletcher to deliver it tomorrow. She'll understand. Will she? Rebecca wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Understanding why her son chose an accused witch over his home and family, a small smile played at the corner of Wade's mouth. My ma never believed in witches. She believed in people, good ones and bad ones. She taught me to recognize the difference. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the occasional whinny of the horses the only sounds breaking the stillness of the winter night. We should reach the Johnson homestead by tomorrow evening, Wade said finally. Old friends of my father's, they'll give us shelter for a few days while we decide our next move. Rebecca nodded, staring into the flames. You keep saying we and us, Wade. I never asked for a traveling companion. No, he agreed, you didn't. Then why the truth this time? Wade set his coffee cup down and looked directly at her. Because I've watched. You grow from a girl who collected frogs in her pockets to a woman who saved my mother's life when the pneumonia nearly took her. Because I've seen you sit up 3 nights straight with sick children while their parents slept. Because I know you're innocent of their accusations. He paused. And because I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy something good. Rebecca felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through her chest. You've changed, Wade Hamilton. Not changed, he corrected quietly. Just grew into who I was supposed to be. He stood, brushing off his trousers. Get some rest. Dawn comes early and we've got a lot of ground to cover. As Rebecca settled into her tent that night, she listened to Wade moving about the camp, securing things, checking the horses one last time. Outside, her safe world had crumbled, leaving her adrift and homeless. Yet somehow, in this moment of greatest uncertainty, she felt strangely protected. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to cast her out, Fargo had unknowingly given her something unexpected, a companion who saw her worth when others saw only fear. Whether that would be enough for the journey ahead, she couldn't say. But for tonight, it was something to hold onto in the darkness. Dawn brought clear skies and bitter cold. Rebecca awoke to find Wade already up, the fire rebuilt and coffee brewing. The small domestic scene struck her with its unfamiliarity. She had lived alone since her father died 3 years ago, answerable to no one, dependent on no one. Sleep well? Wade asked, handing her a steaming cup. Better than I expected, she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Its warmth between her palms was a small comfort against the morning chill. They broke camp efficiently and were on the road as the sun cleared the horizon, turning the snow-covered plains into a glittering expanse of white and gold. Rebecca found herself studying Wade as he drove the wagon. His profile was strong against the morning light, straight nose, firm jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes squinting slightly against the glare of sun on snow. You're staring, he noted without turning his head. Rebecca didn't look away. I'm trying to understand you, not much to understand. I'm a simple man, she laughed softly. No man who would leave everything behind for a woman the town called witches simple, Wade Hamilton. He shrugged, a gesture so casual it belied the weight of his actions. Perhaps I never much cared what the town thought. You cared enough to build a respectable business, to become someone they looked up to. Wade was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low against the creak of wagon wheels. My father used to say a man's worth isn't measured by how others see him, but by what he does when no one's looking. He glanced at her. What kind of man would I be if I let fear drive how I treat people I know are decent? Before Rebecca could respond, the wagon hit a rut, jostling them both. Wade steadied her with a hand on her arm, the contact brief but solid. Then his attention returned to the road, the conversation apparently finished. They traveled in companionable silence for much of the morning, the vastness of the Dakota prairie spreading around them. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. Your hands, Wade noted as Rebecca unwrapped her food, they're getting chapped from the cold. Rebecca looked down at her reddened fingers. As a healer, her hands were her most valuable tools and she'd always taken care to protect them. But in the rush to leave, she'd forgotten her lambskin gloves. "I have something that might help." Without waiting for her response, Wade rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin of salve. Made from beeswax and lanolin, used it on cattle drives when the weather turns. Rebecca accepted the tin, a small smile playing at her lips. "A cowboy with healing salve, you're full of surprises. Just practical." He watched as she applied the balm to her hands. "My mother worried about my hands cracking when I first started driving cattle, made sure I never left without this." "Eliza Hamilton," Rebecca mused, "always taking care of everyone." She looked up at him. "She must be devastated that you've left." A shadow passed over Wade's face. "She understands standing up for what's right. After my father died, when people whispered that he'd gambled away his savings and left us destitute, she held her head high and kept on living truthfully." His jaw tightened. The whispers were wrong then too. Rebecca remembered those days, the sudden death of Joseph Hamilton, the rumors that followed, how 16-year-old Wade had stepped into his father's boots overnight. She'd been 14 then, still learning healing from her own father, too caught up in her studies to pay much attention to town gossip. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "No reason you should have." He stood, brushing crumbs from his coat. "We should keep moving if we want to reach the Johnsons by nightfall." As they continued their journey, the winter sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered land. Rebecca found herself thinking about the homes they'd left behind, her small cottage with its herb garden now dormant under snow, Wade's ranch with its sturdy barn and the cattle that had been his livelihood. "What will happen to your ranch?" she asked suddenly. Wade kept his eyes on the road ahead. "My foreman Jenkins will keep it running. He's a good man, knows the business almost as well as I do." He glanced at her. "If we don't come back, I've left instructions with my lawyer to sell it and send the money to my mother." "If we don't come back," Rebecca repeated softly. The reality of their situation settled over her anew. They were truly exiles now, heading into an uncertain future. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Coming with me?" Wade was silent for a long moment, his breath visible in the cold air. "No," he said finally. "Some choices you make and wonder about later. Others," he looked at her directly, "others you know are right the moment you make them." Something shifted in Rebecca's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with her heavy wool coat. For the first time since the town meeting, she felt the knot of fear inside her loosen slightly. As the afternoon waned, they came upon a crossroads. To the north, the trail continued toward the Johnson homestead. To the west, another road stretched toward the distant horizon. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop, studying both paths. "Johnson Place is about 3 hours that way," he said, nodding north. "But there's a storm coming." He pointed to the darkening sky in the northwest, where heavy clouds were gathering. Rebecca followed his gaze. Her father had taught her to read weather signs, and what she saw concerned her. "How far to the next safe stop if we go west?" "Too far to reach before dark," Wade admitted. "But heading north puts us closer to Fargo territory, if anyone's following." He didn't finish the thought. Rebecca considered their options. "Would the Johnsons turn us in?" Wade shook his head firmly. "Never. Old man Johnson would hide us in his root cellar and claim he never saw us before he'd give in to pressure from Fargo." "Then north," she decided. "A storm in open country is a death sentence this time of year." Wade nodded, turning the wagon toward the northern path. As they traveled, the sky continued to darken, and the wind picked up, carrying the first flakes of what promised to be a significant snowfall. "We need to move faster," Wade said, urging the horses to a quicker pace. "That storm's moving in quicker than I thought." Rebecca clutched the side of the wagon as they bounced along the increasingly snow-covered trail. Within an hour, the storm hit in earnest, swirling snow, reducing visibility to mere yards, wind howling across the open prairie with nothing to break its force. Wade wrapped an arm around Rebecca, pulling her closer to share body heat as he struggled to keep the horses on the trail. "Can't see the path anymore," he shouted over the wind. We might have to stop and wait it out. We'll freeze, Rebecca called back, clutching her coat tightly around her. There, Wade pointed ahead where a dark shape loomed against the white landscape. Looks like an old line shack. He guided the horses toward the structure, which gradually took form through the blowing snow, a small, rough-hewn cabin, likely built by cowboys working the range in better weather. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter from the brutal storm. Wade helped Rebecca down from the wagon, then quickly led the horses to the lee side of the cabin where they would have some protection from the worst of the wind. He unloaded essential supplies while Rebecca pushed open the cabin door. The interior was Spartan but found a small iron stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with a single chair, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Dust covered everything, but there was a small stack of firewood beside the stove, left by some previous occupant. "It's not much," Wade said as he carried in their supplies, "but it'll keep us alive until this passes." Rebecca immediately set to work clearing the stove and preparing a fire while Wade made a second trip to secure their wagon and bring in more supplies. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, she had a small fire crackling in the stove. "You're good at that," he remarked, setting down his burden and removing his snow-covered coat. "My father believed a healer should know survival skills," she replied, feeding another stick into the growing flames. Fire starting was lesson 1. As the cabin slowly warmed, they took stock of their situation. The storm showed no signs of abating, howling around the cabin corners with increasing ferocity. Night was falling, adding darkness to the already limited visibility of the blizzard. "We're not going anywhere until morning at the earliest," Wade concluded, looking out the cabin's single small window at the whiteout conditions. "Maybe not even then." Rebecca nodded, unpacking their meager food supplies on the table. "At least we have shelter." Many travelers caught in blizzards aren't so fortunate. They prepared a simple meal of jerky stew, supplemented with dried beans and a few potatoes Wade had packed. The warm food helped drive the last of the chill from their bones, and as they sat at the table afterward, the situation took on a strange domesticity. "Reminds me of when we were children," Rebecca said suddenly, watching the firelight play across Wade's features. "Remember when we got caught in that summer storm at the creek? We sheltered in that hollow oak until it passed." Wade smiled at the memory. "You were about 12, I think, told me all about the different types of clouds and what they meant." "You remembered that?" She looked surprised. "I remember a lot about those days," he said quietly, "before responsibilities pulled us in different directions." Rebecca studied him across the table. In the flickering light, with his guard down, Wade looked younger, somehow more like the boy who had once shown her how to skip stones across the creek, and less like the hardened cowboy who defied an entire town. "Why did you really come with me, Wade?" she asked softly. "The whole truth this time." Wade met her gaze steadily. "Because watching them condemn you for helping people made something clear to me." He paused. "I've spent years building a life that looked right to others, the successful rancher, the respected businessman, but when it mattered, when someone He stopped, seeming to search for the right word. "When someone I cared about needed standing up for, I realized all that meant nothing if I couldn't do what was right." "You cared about me?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely audible above the storm's howl. "I never stopped," he admitted. "Even when our paths rarely crossed anymore. Even when I heard rumors you might marry the schoolteacher." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Though I was relieved when that turned out not to be true." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove's warmth. "Mr. Parker asked, but I declined. My healing work left little time for courting." She looked down at her hands. "And perhaps I was waiting for someone who understood that my calling was as much a part of me as my own heartbeat." The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and the persistent moan of the wind. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside this rough shelter, something else was brewing, a quiet recognition of feelings long set aside but never truly forgotten. We should rest, Wade said finally, breaking the moment. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. They faced the practical problem of sleeping arrangements, one narrow cot and two people. After brief discussion, Wade insisted Rebecca take the cot while he made a pallet on the floor near the stove. I've slept on worse on cattle drives, he assured her when she protested. You take the cot. As Rebecca settled onto the thin mattress, pulling her coat over herself for additional warmth, she watched Wade arrange his bedroll on the floor. In the dimming light of the banked fire, his movements were efficient, practiced a man accustomed to making do with whatever circumstances provided. Good night, Wade, she said softly as he stretched out on his makeshift bed. Good night, Rebecca, he replied, his voice a low rumble in the darkening cabin. Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together. As she drifted towards sleep, lulled by the storm's rhythm and the knowledge that she wasn't facing exile alone, Rebecca found herself wondering what together might come to mean in this new, uncertain life they had chosen. Morning arrived with eerie silence. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a transformed world outside the cabin windows. Drifts of snow stood taller than a man in some places, and the sun reflected blindingly off the pristine white landscape. Rebecca woke to find Wade already up, stoking the fire back to life and heating water for coffee. He turned at the sound of her movement, his face shadowed with stubble but his eyes alert. Storm's past, he reported, but we've got a new problem. She sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. What is it? Snow's too deep for the wagon. We'll need to wait for it to settle or melt some before we can continue north. Rebecca rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders as she joined him at the window. The snow stretched unbroken in all directions, the trail completely obliterated. How long? Wade shrugged. A day, maybe two if the sun stays strong. He handed her a cup of coffee. Good news is we're safe here, got enough supplies to wait it out. They spent the day in necessary tasks. Wade dug a path to check on the horses and bring in more firewood, while Rebecca took inventory of their supplies and prepared meals. The small cabin became their world, isolated from everything beyond by an impenetrable blanket of white. As evening approached, they sat together at the table sharing a stew Rebecca had managed to create from their dwindling supplies, supplemented with herbs she carried in her healer's bag. This is remarkably good, Wade commented, taking another spoonful. What's in it? Rebecca smiled. The same herbs that got me accused of witchcraft: rosemary, thyme, a touch of sage. Seems the town's loss is my gain, he replied, returning her smile. After dinner, with nothing but time before them, they fell into conversation, the kind that unspools naturally when two people find themselves isolated together with shared history and uncertain future. You ever think about staying in one place? Rebecca asked as they sat near the stove, the only light coming from its open door and a single candle on the table. Setting down roots somewhere people don't know us or our past, Wade considered this, his face thoughtful in the flickering light. Been thinking about it more lately. The cattle drives take a toll weeks away, sleeping rough, always at the mercy of weather and markets. He looked at her. What about you? Your healing, can you practice it anywhere? People get sick everywhere, she replied simply. They need help everywhere. And the land provides remedies wherever you go, you just need to learn to recognize them. She paused. But it would be nice to build something permanent, a place where people come for help without fear. Without being called witch, Wade added softly. Rebecca nodded, her expression shadowed. The accusations hurt, but do you know what hurt more? How quickly people I'd helped turned against me. Mothers whose babies I'd delivered, men whose broken bones I'd set, all suddenly looking at me like I was something dangerous. Fear does that, Wade said. Makes people forget kindness in favor of safety. Is that why you never married? Rebecca asked suddenly. Fear? Wade looked surprised by the question. Fear of what? Of letting someone close enough to hurt you. After your father died and the rumors started, you changed, became more distant. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Maybe, he admitted finally, or maybe I just never found someone who felt right. His eyes met hers across the small space. Until recently. The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Rebecca felt her heart quicken, aware they were venturing into territory as uncharted as the snow-covered landscape outside. Recently, she repeated softly. Wade set his cup down and moved to sit beside her on the edge of the cot. The proximity was sudden but not unwelcome, his shoulder solid against hers. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about why it was so easy to leave everything behind, why the choice to go with you felt like the most natural decision I've ever made." He turned to face her. "I think I've been waiting years for a reason to find my way back to you." Rebecca's breath caught. In the dancing firelight, Wade's eyes held a warmth that melted something frozen inside her, a part of herself she had protected since the town's betrayal. "I never thought." She began, but words failed her. "Neither did I," he admitted. "Not until I saw you standing alone against the town council, dignity intact even as they tried to strip it away." His hand found hers, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You were magnificent, Rebecca. Brave in a way that made me realize how much I'd compromised trying to be what others expected." She looked down at their joined hands. "And now we're both outcasts. Now we're both free," he corrected. "Free to choose who we want to be and where we want to go." His thumb traced small circles on her palm. "And who we want to be with." The moment stretched between them, fragile as new ice on a river. Rebecca felt herself leaning toward him almost without conscious thought, drawn by something that had perhaps always existed beneath the surface of their separate lives. When their lips met, it was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Rebecca answered by sliding her hand to the nape of his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something neither had anticipated, but both had perhaps been moving toward since the moment he said, "Then I go too." The sudden crackle of the fire breaking through a log startled them apart. For a moment they simply looked at each other, both slightly breathless, the reality of what had just happened settling between them. "I didn't plan that," Wade said finally, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Rebecca laughed softly. "I don't think either of us has been following a plan since we left Fargo." His hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender in its simplicity. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." That night, they slept side by side on the narrow cot, Wade's arm curved protectively around Rebecca's waist, her back nestled against his chest. Outside, the temperature dropped further, but inside their small sanctuary, they found a warmth that had nothing to do with the banked fire in the stove, and everything to do with possibilities neither had dared imagine before. The morning brought blinding sunshine and the distinct sound of sleigh bells approaching the cabin. Wade was up instantly, reaching for his rifle while Rebecca quickly dressed. "Stay back," he warned, positioning himself near the window where he could see without being seen. After a tense moment, his shoulders relaxed. "It's the Johnsons, Old Man Johnson and his son." Relief flooded through Rebecca as Wade opened the door to greet their visitors. Tobias Johnson was a weathered man in his 60s, his son Isaac a broad-shouldered replica about 10 years younger than Wade. They had come searching after Wade, and Rebecca failed to arrive as expected during the storm. "Figured you might have holed up here," Tobias said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the cabin. "Only shelter between Fargo and our place." His sharp eyes took in the single rumpled cot and the obvious signs of shared habitation, but he made no comment. Isaac remained outside, checking on Wade's horses and securing his sleigh. Through the open door, Rebecca could see he had brought a small plow attachment that had cleared a path through the deeper snow. "We can get you back to our place now," Tobias continued. "Storms passed and we've broken trail. Isaac can help with your wagon." Within the hour, they had transferred essential supplies to the Johnson sleigh, secured the wagon as best they could until the snow melted enough to retrieve it, and were headed toward the Johnson homestead. Rebecca sat beside Wade in the back of the sleigh, his arm around her shoulders to steady her against the bumpy ride. "Tobias knows," she whispered, watching the back of their host's head as he drove. "About Fargo casting us out," Wade nodded. "News travels fast out here, even in winter." His arm tightened slightly around her. But the Johnsons aren't the type to turn away folks in need, especially when the need comes from standing up for what's right. The Johnson homestead appeared as they crested a substantial farmhouse with several outbuildings, smoke rising steadily from 2 chimneys. As they drew closer, Rebecca could see it was larger and more prosperous than she had imagined, with glass windows and a covered porch that spoke of established comfort rather than frontier survival. Martha Johnson met them at the door, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and an air of quiet competence that immediately put Rebecca at ease. She welcomed them without question, showing them to a comfortable guest room with a double bed and privacy they hadn't expected. "You'll stay until you decide your next move," she informed them as she laid out clean towels. "No one from Fargo comes this way in winter, so you're safe here." That evening, gathered around the Johnsons' large dining table, the conversation inevitably turned to their situation. Tobias, it transpired, had little love for the Fargo Town Council. "Bunch of self-important fools," he declared, passing Rebecca a bowl of mashed potatoes. "Same ones who tried to run off the Cheyenne family that settled here 5 years back. Said they were disruptive influences because they wouldn't sell their land to the railroad." "What happened to them?" Rebecca asked. Martha smiled. "They're still here, 3 farms over. Their eldest daughter teaches at our local school now." Wade exchanged a look with Rebecca. "Sounds like a different kind of community than Fargo." "We believe in judging folks by their actions, not rumors," Tobias said simply. "Always room for good people willing to work hard and help their neighbors." That night, in the privacy of their room, Rebecca and Wade discussed their options. The guest bed felt luxuriously large after the narrow cot of the line shack, but they still lay close together, voices low in the darkness. "We could stay," Wade suggested. "At least until spring. I could help Isaac with the winter work. You could assist Martha with whatever healing needs arise." Rebecca considered this, her head resting on his shoulder. "And then we decide. Montana is still an option, or," he hesitated, "we could consider making a more permanent arrangement here." She lifted her head to look at him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "Permanent how?" Wade's hand found hers beneath the covers. "I'm not proposing marriage after 3 days on the trail together," he said, a smile in his voice. "But I think we both know this isn't just about escaping Fargo anymore. There's something between us worth exploring, Rebecca. Something that maybe was always there, just waiting for the right moment." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I'm not sure I'm ready to say exactly what this is yet," she admitted, "but I know I don't want to face whatever comes next without you beside me." "That's enough for now," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We've got time to figure out the rest." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Wade worked alongside Isaac, helping with winter repairs and caring for livestock. Rebecca assisted Martha, who turned out to be something of a healer herself, and soon found herself treating various ailments among the scattered homesteads that made up the rural community. Word of her skills spread quickly. By February, people were traveling considerable distances to seek her help. A young woman with difficult pregnancies, an elderly man with joint pain that worsened in the cold, children with winter coughs that wouldn't subside. "You've got a gift," Martha told her one evening as they prepared remedies together in the warm kitchen. "Different from mine. I know the old ways, the traditional cures, but you understand why things work, not just that they do." Rebecca smiled, carefully measuring dried elderberry into small paper packets. "My father taught me to question everything, to observe carefully, to remember what worked and what didn't. He believed healing was both art and science." "Smart man," Martha nodded. "And he raised a daughter with both heart and mind engaged in her work." She paused in her own task, regarding Rebecca thoughtfully. You know, old Dr. Fellows over in Bismarck is looking for someone to train with him. He's getting on in years and wants to pass on his practice. Rebecca looked up in surprise. A formal medical practice? For a woman? Times are changing, even out here, Martha replied. Fellows is progressive, studied in Philadelphia with women doctors, says they often have a better touch with certain patients. She smiled. Just something to consider if you and Wade decide to stay in Dakota territory. The possibility planted itself in Rebecca's mind, growing stronger as winter slowly loosened its grip on the land. By March, as the first hints of thaw appeared, she and Wade had become integral parts of the Johnson household, and the wider community, their status as outcasts from Fargo transforming into something approaching respect in their new surroundings. Their relationship deepened too, moving beyond the initial attraction and shared circumstances into something both recognized as love, though the word itself remained largely unspoken between them. They learned each other's habits, preferences, strengths, and weaknesses. Wade discovered Rebecca's tendency to lose track of time when absorbed in her work. She learned his preference for solitude after too many hours of social interaction. They argued occasionally about directions, about risks Rebecca took riding alone to distant homesteads, about Wade's stubborn insistence on handling difficult tasks without help. But each disagreement ended in greater understanding, a deepening of the connection that had begun that day on the town hall steps in Fargo. You're good together, Isaac observed one evening in early April as he and Wade repaired harnesses in the barn. Never seen two people figure each other out so quick, Wade smiled, his hands working steadily at the leather straps. Don't know that it was quick. Known her most of my life, just never allowed myself to see her this way before. Going to make it official? Isaac asked bluntly. The question gave Wade pause. He and Rebecca had settled into a comfortable partnership, sharing a room at the Johnsons without comment from their hosts, making plans together for the future. But he hadn't formally asked her to marry him, partly out of concern it was too soon, partly from uncertainty about what she wanted. Been thinking about it, he admitted. But we've both had our lives appended, don't want to rush her into another big decision. Isaac laughed. From what I've seen of Miss Rebecca, she knows her own mind pretty clear. Don't think you'd be rushing her into anything she wasn't ready for. That night, as they prepared for bed, Wade watched Rebecca brush out her long hair before the small mirror. The simple domesticity of the moment struck him with unexpected force. How natural it felt to share these quiet moments, how empty his life would seem without her in it now. I got a letter today, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. From Jenkins, my foreman. Rebecca turned, brush paused mid-stroke. News from Fargo, Wade nodded. The new doctor left couldn't handle frontier practice after all, and there's been some sickness. Mayor's youngest died. Oh no, Rebecca's face softened with genuine sympathy despite everything. Poor Mary Hollister. She doted on that child. Jenkins says there's talk about the council being too hasty with you. Some folks are saying they should have listened to your warnings about keeping the sick children isolated. Rebecca set down her brush, coming to sit beside him. Are they asking us to come back? Not in so many words, but Jenkins thinks if we returned, there'd be no opposition now. He studied her face. Is that something you'd want, to go back? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. A month ago, I might have said yes, vindication is powerful. She took his hand. But now. Fargo doesn't feel like home anymore. This place does. These people do. She looked up at him. You do. The simplicity of her statement, the quiet certainty in her voice, gave Wade the courage he'd been gathering. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring, simple but elegant, with a small pearl set in silver. Bought this in Bismarck last week when I went with Isaac, he explained, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous. Wasn't planning to ask tonight, but... He took a deep breath. Rebecca Nichols, I know we came together under strange circumstances, but I think maybe we were always heading toward each other, just taking the long way around. He held out the ring. Will you marry me, make this new beginning an official one? Rebecca looked at the ring, then at Wade's face, the earnest blue eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that betrayed his anxiety about her answer. In that moment, she saw both the boy who had taught her to skip stones and the man who had chosen exile rather than stand by while injustice prevailed. "Yes," she said simply, her smile breaking through like sunrise. "Yes, I will." The ring slipped onto her finger as if made for her, the pearl catching the lamplight with a soft glow. Wade pulled her close, his kiss a promise of the future they would build together. One neither could have imagined that snowy day in Fargo when everything had seemed lost. They married in early May, with apple blossoms scenting the air and the prairie turning green with new life. The ceremony took place in the Johnsons' front parlor, with Reverend Guthrie from the nearby settlement officiating. Martha had helped Rebecca sew a simple but beautiful wedding dress from cream-colored fabric, ordered specially from Bismarck, and Wade wore a new shirt and his best pants, freshly pressed for the occasion. The guest list included not just the Johnsons but several families from surrounding homesteads who had come to know and respect the couple over the winter months. Among them was Dr. Fellows, the elderly physician from Bismarck who had been corresponding with Rebecca about a possible apprenticeship. After the simple ceremony and a celebratory meal, Wade led Rebecca outside to show her his wedding gift, a wagon, newly purchased, loaded with supplies for their journey. "Are we leaving?" she asked, surprised. Wade shook his head, smiling. "Not leaving, just moving." He pointed toward a distant rise about 2 miles from the Johnson place. "Tobias sold me 40 acres there, good land with a creek running through it. We'll build our home there." Rebecca stared at him in amazement. "You bought land when?" "Been working on it since February." "Wanted it to be a surprise." He squeezed her hand. "There's a cabin already, small but sound. Previous owner left for California last year. Isaac and I have been fixing it up whenever you were busy with your patients. So all those long days you were supposedly helping with spring planting." "Some planting, some cabin fixing," he admitted with a grin. "Wanted to have a proper home to offer my wife." "Your wife," Rebecca repeated, testing the word and finding she liked the sound of it. "And what will your wife do on these 40 acres while you're building your cattle herd?" Wade's smile widened. "Well, Dr. Fellows seems to think there's room for a small medical practice in the front room of our cabin. Says he'll send patients your way and continue your training." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You discussed this with him before asking me?" "Discussed possibilities," Wade corrected. "The decisions are yours to make, always will be." His expression grew serious. "I didn't rescue you from Fargo, Rebecca. We rescued each other from lives that were less than what they could be. Whatever comes next, we decide together." Rebecca stood on tiptoe to kiss him, there in the spring sunshine with their future stretching before them. Around them, the Dakota prairie was coming alive after the long winter green shoots pushing through soil, birds calling to mates, life renewing itself in countless ways. It seemed a fitting backdrop for their new beginning. "Together," she agreed, her hand in his. "That sounds like a plan I can follow." That evening, after the guests had departed, and the newlyweds had thanked the Johnsons for their extraordinary hospitality, Wade drove their wagon to the small cabin that would be their first home. As they approached in the golden light of sunset, Rebecca could see the improvements Wade and Isaac had made: new glass in the windows, a freshly shingled roof, a small covered porch added to the front. Inside was simple but comfortable, a main room that could serve both as living space and Rebecca's consultation area, a small kitchen with a new iron stove, and a bedroom with a handcrafted bed frame that Wade admitted proudly he had made himself. "It's perfect," Rebecca declared, turning slowly to take in every detail. "Absolutely perfect." Later, as they lay together in their new bed, the sounds of the prairie night surrounding them, Wade traced lazy patterns on Rebecca's bare shoulder. "Thinking about the day we left Fargo," he murmured. "If someone had told me then that being cast out would lead to this, I'd never have believed them. Rebecca nestled closer against him. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings, she replied softly, though I'd never have had the courage to leave on my own. Courage was never your problem, Wade said, pressing a kiss to her hair. You stood your ground against the entire town council. I just provided the transportation, she laughed quietly. And now look at us, landowners, respected members of a new community. You building a new herd, me with medical prospects I never imagined. She lifted her head to look at him in the dim light. Do you ever regret it, leaving everything behind? Wade's answer was immediate and certain, not for a single moment. His hand cupped her cheek gently. Some things are worth losing everything for. You're one of them. The months that followed brought both challenges and joys as they established their new life. Wade began building his herd, starting small with a few quality cattle purchased from neighboring ranchers. Rebecca divided her time between assisting Dr. Fellows in Bismarck twice weekly and seeing patients in their cabin the other days. Word of her skills spread, and soon people were traveling considerable distances to consult Mrs. Hamilton, the healer about ailments both common and unusual. Rebecca never called herself doctor. She lacked the formal credentials, but her knowledge and effectiveness earned her a reputation that formal titles couldn't have enhanced. By autumn, their small homestead had begun to take shape. A vegetable garden yielded its first harvest. The cabin interior had been made cozy with items both practical and decorative, and the foundation had been laid for a barn that would be completed before winter set in. One crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching their property with purpose. Wade tensed slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle kept near the door. As the rider drew closer, Rebecca gasped in recognition. "It's Jenkins," she said, "your foreman from Fargo." Wade stood, stepping off the porch to meet his former employee as the man reined in his horse. Jenkins looked trail-weary but relieved to have reached his destination. "Mr. Hamilton," he greeted Wade with a nod. "Mrs. Hamilton," he added, acknowledging Rebecca who had joined her husband, "been looking for you two for quite a spell." "Long way from Fargo, Jenkins," Wade observed neutrally. "What brings you?" The foreman dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Got news, sir, and some business to discuss if you're willing to hear it." They invited him in, fed him a hot meal, and listened as he explained his presence. The situation in Fargo had changed dramatically over the summer. The new doctor who had replaced Rebecca's accuser had himself left after failing to stem a fever outbreak. Mayor Hollister, grieving his son and facing criticism for his handling of the witch hunt, had resigned his position. "Town's been without proper medical help for months now," Jenkins explained. "And folks are remembering how Miss Rebecca, beg pardon, Mrs. Hamilton now kept us all healthy before. There's talk of formally rescinding the expulsion order." Rebecca and Wade exchanged glances across the table. "That's unexpected," Rebecca said carefully. Jenkins nodded. "There's more. Your mother's been asking after you, Mr. Hamilton. She's doing all right, but she misses you something fierce." A pang of guilt crossed Wade's face. Though they had exchanged letters with Eliza Hamilton, assuring her of their safety and happiness, he hadn't seen his mother since leaving Fargo. "And the ranch?" Wade asked. "That's the other thing I came to discuss," Jenkins replied. "Been running it best I can, sir, but it needs its owner. Or—" He hesitated. "It needs to be sold proper, with all the legal papers signed." The implications hung in the air between them. Their exile from Fargo had been hastily arranged, leaving business matters partially unresolved. The ranch technically remained Wade's property, but without his presence its future remained uncertain. After Jenkins had been shown to the small guest room they had recently added, Rebecca and Wade sat before the fire, discussing the unexpected development. "We could go back," Wade said quietly. "Not to stay necessarily, but to settle matters properly. See my mother." Let you have the satisfaction of seeing those who wronged you acknowledge their mistake. Rebecca considered this, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Would you want to stay if they asked us to return permanently? Wade took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding ring that now accompanied her engagement pearl. My home is where you are, he said simply. Here, Fargo, anywhere else, but I think we've built something good here, something that's ours in a way Fargo never was for either of us. She nodded, leaning against his shoulder. I agree, but I'd like to see your mother and perhaps… She hesitated. Perhaps there's some healing needed there too, not just for us but for the town, for closure. They decided to make the journey after the first snow a temporary visit to settle affairs, see family, and close the chapter of their lives that had ended so abruptly that December day. Jenkins would return ahead of them to prepare the way and ensure their reception would not be hostile. We'll be back for Christmas, Rebecca assured Martha Johnson when they informed their friends of their plans. Our home is here now. The journey to Fargo in early December was oddly familiar yet strange, retracing their route of exile a year later as different people. The town appeared on the horizon much as they had left it, though Rebecca noted new construction along the main street, and several unfamiliar faces among those who turned to watch their wagon pass. They went first to Wade's mother's house, where Eliza Hamilton greeted her son with tears and embraces before turning to welcome Rebecca as the daughter she had gained. I always hoped, she confessed as they sat in her cozy parlor, that you two would find your way to each other. Though I never imagined it would take such dramatic circumstances. Their reception in the wider community was mixed but largely positive. Some townspeople avoided them, crossing the street rather than offer greetings. Others approached with apologies, awkward but sincere. Mayor Hollister's wife, Mary, sought Rebecca out specifically, her face lined with grief but her manner dignified. My husband was wrong, she said simply. We were all wrong and we paid a terrible price for our fear. She clasped Rebecca's hands in her own. I don't ask forgiveness, that's too much to expect. But I wanted you to know that I, at least, recognize the injustice done to you. The town council, under new leadership, formally rescinded the expulsion order in a public meeting that neither Wade nor Rebecca attended, preferring to let the gesture stand without their presence making the proceedings more awkward. Business matters were settled, efficiently, Wade transferring ownership of his ranch to Jenkins for a fair price. Rebecca meeting with her father's old lawyer to ensure her cottage and property were properly sold rather than abandoned. As they prepared to leave after a week in Fargo, Eliza Hamilton made a request that surprised them both. I'd like to come with you, she said over breakfast on their final morning. Not immediately, I have affairs to settle here, but by spring, perhaps. If you'd have room for an old woman who'd like to be near her family. Wade looked to Rebecca, who smiled warmly. We'd be delighted, she assured her mother-in-law. The cabin has room for expansion, and I could use help with the garden while I'm working with patients. They left Fargo with a sense of completion rather than escape, this time driving west toward their new home with the winter sun at their backs, and the future ahead clearer than it had been a year before. Strange to think, Rebecca mused as the town disappeared behind them, that their fear and prejudice ultimately led us to a better life than we might have had if they'd accepted me. Wade nodded, his arm around her shoulders as he guided the horses. Sometimes being cast out is really being set free, he agreed. Though I wouldn't recommend it as a general strategy. Rebecca laughed, leaning into him as the wagon carried them home to their land, their community, the life they were building together. Behind them lay vindication and closure. Ahead lay purpose and love. It was more than either had dared hope for when they'd fled Fargo in disgrace, outcast but together. By the time they returned to their homestead, snow blanketed the prairie in pristine white. The Johnsons welcomed them with a celebratory dinner, eager to hear about their journey and its resolution. In the warmth of friendship and the comfort of their own small cabin afterward, Rebecca and Wade felt the rightness of their decision to return here rather than remain in Fargo, despite the town's change of heart. "This is where we belong now," Wade said as they prepared for bed that night. "This is where we build our future," Rebecca agreed, though something in her voice made Wade look at her more closely. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the mixture of nervousness and excitement in her expression. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, still flat but containing their greatest hope. "Our future may be arriving sooner than we planned," she said softly. "Dr. Fellows confirmed it before we left for Fargo. I wanted to be certain before I told you." Wade's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of seconds. "A baby, we're having a baby," Rebecca nodded, laughing as he lifted her in a careful embrace. "In early summer, Dr. Fellows thinks? June, probably." That night, as snow fell gently outside their window, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and dreaming dreams that neither could have imagined possible that fateful day in Fargo when the town had voted to cast her out. "I never believed in fate," Wade murmured against her hair. "Always thought a man made his own way in the world through hard work and good sense." "And now," Rebecca prompted, hearing the qualification in his voice. "Now I think sometimes life knows better than we do where we're meant to be," he replied, "and who we're meant to be with." Spring brought renewed activity to their homestead. With the news of a baby coming, Wade accelerated his plans for expanding the cabin, adding another bedroom and enlarging the kitchen with help from Isaac Johnson and other neighbors. Rebecca continued her medical work, but began training a young woman from a nearby farm to assist her, knowing she would need to reduce her patient load as her pregnancy progressed. Eliza Hamilton arrived in April, bringing with her cherished family possessions and a lifetime of knowledge about raising children on the frontier. She settled into the household seamlessly, her presence adding another dimension of warmth to their home. "Never thought I'd live to see my grandchild," she confessed to Rebecca one afternoon as they prepared the garden for planting. "After Wade stayed single so long, I'd given up hope." Rebecca smiled, one hand resting on her growing belly. "He was waiting for the right moment, or the right person." "He was waiting for you," Eliza corrected gently, "even if he didn't know it himself." By June, Rebecca's medical practice had been temporarily transferred to her assistant Jane under Dr. Fellows' supervision, and the community held its collective breath waiting for news of the Hamilton baby. The summer heat had settled over the prairie when Rebecca went into labor on a clear morning, with Eliza managing the birth and Wade pacing anxiously outside until his mother finally called him in to meet his son. William Joseph Hamilton entered the world with a robust cry and his father's blue eyes. Wade held him with trembling hands, looking from the tiny face to Rebecca's tired but radiant one with an expression of such profound love that words became unnecessary. "He's perfect," he managed finally, sitting carefully beside Rebecca on the bed. "You're perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "Not luck," she corrected softly. "Choice. You chose to stand by me when no one else would. Everything good we have now grew from that one moment of courage." As summer faded into autumn and their sun grew stronger each day, their homestead flourished as well. Wade's cattle herd increased. Rebecca gradually resumed her medical practice with baby William often accompanying her on visits. And Eliza became an integral part of their community, her wisdom and experience valued by neighbors young and old. Visitors from Fargo occasionally made the journey to see them Jenkins with ranch business, Mary Hollister seeking Rebecca's medical advice for her remaining children, others curious about the couple whose departure had changed the town's perspective on so many things. "They're still talking about you too," Jenkins reported during one visit. "The town that cast out its healer and lost its best cattleman in one day becomes something of a cautionary tale about jumping to conclusions." Wade smiled at that, bouncing his son on his knee. "Good. Maybe they'll think twice next time someone different comes along. Or next time sickness strikes," Rebecca added, more practical. I sent Dr. Lawrence my notes on treating fever with willow bark tea, hope he's wise enough to use them. On the first anniversary of their departure from Fargo, a day they now called their freedom anniversary, Wade and Rebecca stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset with their sons sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms and Eliza knitting beside them. Quite a year, Wade reflected, his arm around his wife's shoulders, from outcasts to landed gentry with a growing family and thriving businesses. Rebecca leaned into him, smiling. I wouldn't change a moment of it, not even the hard parts. No regrets then about leaving Fargo. She shook her head firmly. The only regret would have been if you hadn't said then, I go too. Everything good in our lives now began with those words. Wade pressed a kiss to her temple, then another to his sleeping son's forehead. Best decision I ever made, he murmured. Following my heart instead of the crowd. As twilight deepened into darkness, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their land, at night cattle lowing softly in the distance, night birds calling, the gentle creaking of Eliza's rocking chair. This place that had once been strange and uncertain had become home in every sense of the word, not just shelter but belonging, not just possession but purpose. Love you, Wade whispered as stars began appearing overhead. Love you too, Rebecca replied, the words simple, but carrying the weight of everything they had risked and gained together. Inside their home, a lamp burned welcomingly, casting golden light through the windows onto the porch, a beacon of warmth against the gathering dark, just as they had become for each other when the world had seemed coldest and most unforgiving. Cast out but never broken, they had built something stronger than what they had lost, a life of their own choosing, founded on courage and sustained by love that had perhaps always been destined to find its way home.